Tape Deck Media.
Hi there, I am Kelly Zemnikas, and I am the host of a brand new podcast called Holler and Wine. I'm a stand-up comedian, I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I genuinely love talking to people. And despite the fact that I do not care for the sound of my own voice, I've got a podcast now. So please come join us. We're going to have really good conversations. We're going to talk about cocktails, and I am going to give my guests a tarot card reading because why not? So join us on Holler and Wine. Hope to see you soon. Well, it's a podcast, so it's hear you soon? That sounds weird.
Welcome back, faithful listeners, to The Phantom Files, Volume 4. As always, I am your host, the creepy chronicle curator himself, Taylor Ruddle. And my god, how long has it been since the last Phantom Files? I actually checked that today, and it was almost exactly a year ago, at the time of this recording, that I released Phantom Files Volume 3. However, I am delighted to say I've collected some fantastic new stories for you all to hear, and I've even gone out into the field myself to do some of that proper real-life research on a haunted, or, well, possibly haunted location. So I thank you all so much for your patience, and I'm not going to talk any longer. Let's get straight into the first story. I have been sitting on this story for a long time, and it's unfortunate that it's taken me so long to actually put this into an episode, but here we are. It's a fantastic story to kick us off with. I love it, and I hope you're going to enjoy it too.
My name is Rebecca, and I have a story about a lesson, being careful what you put your energy into. I was in my mid-20s, early to mid-20s, and my ex had just taken his life not long before. We had split up, but we were still friends when this happened, and our old landlord was taking us to court through pure greed. We had been living in an almost uninhabitable house, and I was angry. I had a shrine in the corner dedicated to my ex, and it was dark one night, and I was lighting black candles, and I was writing the landlord's name on pieces of paper and burning each one in the flame of a black candle, and then dropping it into an ashtray once it caught a light. And I did this over and over again, and I was so angry. I had a picture of the old man's face right in the front of my mind, and I blamed him for what I'd lost. And the air changed. It got hard to breathe. It was almost like being in a vacuum and your ears pop. And I had a friend of mine coming to visit, and he walked down the side of the house. I could see him coming through the window, and then just before he reached the door, something changed. The energy became almost unbearable in the room, and something very, very dark rose up out of nowhere and just moved towards the door, went through the door and was gone. And Andy came in and he just said, "What the fuck is going on here?" He said that the room still felt intensely thick. And that was the night I created the Hunter, as I call him. And it's an entity that I suppose I'll have to recall him on my deathbed, because that energy is still out there in the world. And I know, because there have been nights when I've been woken up by something, and it felt like something was hovering just above me in the darkness, and I was terrified. I was paralyzed. So be careful what you put out there. There is nothing in this world that can't be explained, people seem to think. I have seen too much, I've heard too much, and I've created too much to believe that. There are things we should leave well enough alone, things we can't understand. And that is the story of a manifestation that I believe came from a very, very dark energy.
Now, eagle-eared listeners will probably recognise that as Rebecca, or Bex, I believe she goes sometimes, from the first ever edition, Volume 1 of the Phantom Files. So once again, thank you for submitting a fantastic story to the show, Bex. You have a fantastic natural ability for telling stories, and I appreciate you taking the time out to tell us about these experiences you've had. If you're listening, Bex, I would love to hear more about this spirit and why you have named him or it the Hunter. I feel like with a name that evocative, maybe you've had some experiences with it in the past. So if you're listening now and you feel like you've got a little bit of time and you'd like to expand on that, go ahead and email me another voice note of some more information about the Hunter. I would absolutely love to hear it. It also makes me wonder whether you've created more of these spirits. Maybe the fact that you've given it a name like the Hunter makes me feel like maybe you've got a little a little Pokemon army of different spirits that you've sort of put out into the world there. So if you're listening, Bex, tell us more. I'm sure the listeners would love to hear it. You have my email address. And to be honest, any listener out there, if you've got a paranormal or potentially paranormal experience out there that you'd like me to play on the Phantom Files, go ahead and email it to ruddlesphantomfiles@gmail.com. I prefer it if you record a voice note on your cell phone, but there are other options in case you don't feel comfortable doing that. Like we could do a Zoom chat and I could sort of talk you through it and then edit out some of my bits. Or you can send it written and I can find one of my comedian friends to do a voiceover and create it that way. Our next story tonight is one that I am narrating myself. Now, I initially did the research on this particular story for a live storytelling and comedy event that I'm sort of working on at the moment called Giggles and Ghost Tales, in which I play some of the clips we've used on this podcast, as well as tell live stories to an audience, and it's got cool, spooky kind of ambience. It's a very cool, atmospheric type show. I've done one so far in Twizel, and everybody that came out said they really enjoyed it. So I've mentioned on the podcast before that I'm based in Christchurch, New Zealand, which is the biggest city in the South Island of New Zealand, and we don't really have a rich history of ghost stories and hauntings here in Christchurch. Even less so after we had the big earthquake in 2011, where a lot of our old buildings were knocked down by the earthquake. So it's going to be another sort of 100 years or so, I think, before we start getting some new ghost stories here in Christchurch. But there was one that I managed to do a bit of research on. I found a good article that was provided by the Christchurch government. They wrote a pretty good account of what happened. I tidied it up a little bit, and then I didn't change the guts of the story, but I changed the way certain events were told to make it a little more spooky. So with that, let's get into the next story of the night.
In March 1894, Christchurch had its very own ghost haunting the streets of north central Christchurch. On the 9th of March, a young man named Cunningham encountered the ghost. It was around 10 p.m, and he had just learnt from some children that something frightening was lurking in the grounds of St. Matthew's Church. As he cautiously approached the church, feeling the hair stick up on the back of his neck, suddenly a figure clad in white flew over the fence and began to leap and bound jerkily up the street towards a group of people. Cunningham was startled, but glad the figure hadn't seemed to notice him, when suddenly it stopped and stood bolt upright. The figure slowly turned back around to face Cunningham, staring directly at him. He got a good look at it for the first time. The figure appeared to be a humanoid, completely white in colour, which was strange. But the thing that stood out the most were the figure's glowing green eyes. The figure bore down upon Cunningham, and his courage failed him. He ran away to find a policeman and made a report at 11 p.m. The police were sceptical, as just a week before, people had made reports of a similar ghost, but it ended up being a girl in a white apron being misidentified. Cunningham was not the only one to encounter the figure on this night, however. At 9 p.m, two women were walking home from a friend's house in Papanui as they neared the provincial buildings on Durham Street, they were startled by the appearance of the same figure in white with glowing green eyes, watching them silently from across the street. It stared at them as they moved past, not moving a muscle except its head, which followed them as they walked. The women shook their heads and continued on, when suddenly they heard the scuff of footsteps behind them. They whirled around to see the figure lurching towards them, its limbs jerking wildly as it ran. They turned to flee, but the white figure overtook them and blocked their path. It swayed and twitched, but remained totally silent, those glowing green eyes boring into them. Without warning, it suddenly lurched to the side and ran off, escaping into the grounds of the provincial buildings. They could follow it for a few seconds, but gradually the glowing eyes faded into the darkness, and the figure was gone. The next sighting was on the March 12th. Two little girls, Lizzie and Bella, had been sent to deliver a message. As they passed the side street off Papanui Road, the familiar white figure with glowing eyes leaped out at them. The figure danced around erratically in front of them for a few seconds. Luckily, Lizzie and Bella kept their wits and ran off and thankfully weren't harmed. On the 13th of March at 11 p.m, a man named Alfred was walking with several women near the vicinity of today's Knox Church when they saw a brief flash of white and heard rustling coming from behind a nearby tree. Alfred left the group to go and investigate. Having been aware of the ghost already, he was expecting to see it come leaping out from behind the tree, but to his surprise, it was two young men hiding behind the tree instead. He started to reprimand them when suddenly one of them punched him in the head. It looked like they were going to keep attacking him until the women ran over, at which point the two young guys ran off. On the 14th of March, a man named Albert was walking home. His walk took him past a paddock on the corner of Armagh and Madras Street, where he noticed something strange. A ghostly white figure standing in the middle of the field, unmoving, illuminated by a green glow that Albert identified as the same glow that phosphorus gives off when exposed to oxygen. It seems that Albert got quite a good look at the ghost, as he was able to see that it wasn't a completely white figure, but it looked to be a person clad entirely in white tights, even with a white mask covering its face, which was lit up with that eerie green glow. The figure must have noticed them, because it became increasingly erratic, running in circles, lurching from side to side, and began advancing on him. Albert was reasonably unnerved by this behavior, and began to try and cross the street, but with frightening swiftness the figure cut him off and continued dancing and swaying erratically in front of him, preventing his escape. Albert summoned all of his courage and made a move to force the figure out of his way, and to his surprise, it suddenly grabbed onto his arm with an ungodly strength. He wrenched back, trying to free his arm, but the figure held on. They fought for a few minutes before the figure in white picked up its leg and kicked him hard while letting go of Albert's arm. Albert was sent reeling by the kick and ended up careening into a gorse fence and then falling to the ground, dazed. By the time Albert was able to free himself from the gorse fence and come to his senses, the figure in white was gone. By this point, the ghost was a well-known urban legend, and people had been spreading all sorts of rumours, like the fact that it had the ability to appear in multiple places at once and leap incredible distances. One of the final encounters with the ghost was by a young couple enjoying a romantic night in Hagley Park. The two were sitting on a bench, enjoying each other's company and watching out over the tranquil park. They were facing the same way, so didn't notice the figure clad all in white appear in the bushes behind them. They didn't hear it as it crept closer and closer to them. They were in their own little world together, enjoying the night. They sure as hell did notice when the figure quickly thrust its white face with the fiery green eyes glowing bright suddenly in between them. This was one of the final recorded encounters with the Victoria Street ghost, as it became known as. All of a sudden, the ghost just disappeared and was never seen again. There was an article written in The Observer on the 28th of April, 1894, which explains what happened. I'll read it here. The Christchurch ghost has been laid. The ladies of the cathedral city breathe again. For weeks this spectre haunted Hagley Park and other out-of-the-way places. His custom was to pop out suddenly from behind a tree or hedge and terrify nursemaids and children and ladies taking their evening walks abroad unattended. He was certainly not a soothing sight, this ghost. Attired in the orthodox white garment, his eyes were surrounded by rings of fire, and he could run like a greyhound. The story goes that one evening in Hagley Park he suddenly appeared to two young lovers who were seated side by side on a park bench. He came up at the back of the bench and thrust his grinning face with the flame-encircled optics between the heads of the lovers. They were nearly startled out of their seven senses. Before they could pull themselves together, the ghost had vanished. But he won't play any more of these tricks. He has been captured. And strange to say, not a word about his seizure appeared in the Christchurch papers. The ghost proved to be an escaped lunatic and the son of a well-known Christchurch medico. The fiery eyes were due to phosphorus rings. So in the end, not a ghost, just another child of someone rich and influential who terrorized the people for a short while. Nobody knows what exactly became of him, but it's theorized he was returned to the Sunnyside Asylum and never managed to escape again.
And we're back. So not exactly the most terrifying story out there, but it does have a certain charm to it. It did quite make me laugh, the fact that the Christchurch newspaper actually printed an article about the ghost of Christchurch. And in case you're wondering, yes, Nepo babies are still to this day terrorizing us working class people. I would have loved to have seen this ghost in person though. I can't quite picture in my head what it would look like to see someone dressed entirely in white tights with rings of glowing phosphorus around their eyes. I also wonder, how did the ghost actually see? Surely you can't. Like, I struggle to see when I hold my cell phone up in front of my face walking around a dark room. I can't imagine how hard it must have been to see with rings of phosphorus literally around your eyes. So for the third story tonight, this one I'm breaking the Phantom Files rules a tiny bit here by playing something that was not submitted by a listener or a person out there in New Zealand. However, I just love this audio so much that I wanted to share this with my listeners. So a little bit of context for this next story tonight. There is an area in Australia called the Pilliga. If you Google it, you can find out all sorts of folklore sightings and allegedly kind of haunted or cryptid kind of things happening in this area called the Pilliga Bush. Now, I originally found this story on the website of Adam Phillips, who is an animator that I used to follow back in the days of newgrounds.com. And he used to have a section on his website, which I think at the time was biteycastle.com. I think he's changed it to something else now, might be bracketwood.com, something like that. But he had a section that was all just for scary stories. And I've been trying to pinpoint exactly when my love of scary stories and ghost stories started out. And I can only think of three-ish kind of core memories, I guess, to quote that Disney movie. Inside Out, that was the movie. The first of which is I remember reading several of those books in the school library that were like scary, what are they, ghost stories to read in the dark, something along those lines. I'm struggling to remember it, but I remember reading those quite a bit, and quite a few of those are stuck in my mind. I remember one about a kid being it sounds ridiculous now that I say it, but a kid being dragged to hell because he went to sleep with his arm dangling over the edge of his bed. And in this story, the way you got nightmares is like somebody or some creature would come up sort of out of the underworld underneath your bed and whisper stories into your ears, and that would give you the nightmares. And this poor kid made the mistake of sleeping with his arm dangling out of his bed, and one of these things grabbed him and pulled him into the underworld, which, you know, like, I've never liked sleeping with my limbs over the edge of a bed as is, so that story just absolutely cemented that I'll never leave anything hanging over the edge of my bed when I'm sleeping. That and the ring wraiths scene from Lord of the Rings when they stab they think they've cornered the hobbits and they stab the pillows. Oh, that freaked me out as a little kid too. The other two, there was a TV show on, it was after school, it was called Freaky, and it was sort of an anthology series with, I think it was filmed in New Zealand actually. I actually recommend it. Some of those stories really creeped me out. There's still some good. I went back and watched some of them quite recently, and a lot of them hold up. And then the final one that I can remember was reading these scary stories on Adam Phillips's website that really sort of, I think I'd always been interested in them as a child, but seeing them on Baiti Castle made me think like, oh, this is actually something that's, you know, an animator that I respect likes scary stories, and I like scary stories, so this is cool. I've been rambling a little bit, but let's get to the point. So this audio was actually up on Adam's website, and it was taken from an Australian radio show called Overnights, which was from like 12 in the morning till 3 in the morning or something like that. And they had a segment where they were talking about the Pilliga bush, and this gentleman called Bongo actually rang up and told them his Pilliga story. So that's all the context I'm going to give you. This is one of my favourite spooky things on the internet, so I hope you enjoy it. Let's roll the audio.
Good morning, Bongo.
Oh, hello there. This is Bongo here. Yeah, I'm at the Happy Days Day retreat. Miss Annie's woke me up and says that they're talking about what happened to me back in 78. That's why I'm here.
Where are you exactly?
Happy Days retreat, like a sanitarium.
Okay.
I was bringing a new vehicle down, brand new vehicle down from Ballata, heading towards Narrabri in 1978. In September it was 78, and heading for Tamworth, and I missed the turn off out of Narrabri to go to Gunnedah, and I kept going, and I didn't know where I was going, and I saw these old mileage pegs on the side of the road. They'd been like painted over in those days, and I thought the engraver in it was a G, like for Gunnedah, but in actual fact they were a C for, turned out to be Coonabarabran.
Right, okay.
And about halfway along the road sort of thing, I started to get a bit concerned. The fuel was running pretty low, and in the distance I saw what turned out to be in those days a telecom beam heading my way. So I got out and I waved him down. It was pretty late in the afternoon, not just before dusk it was. Anyway, pulled up and he cracked the window down just to frighten it a little bit, and I said, look, I don't know where I am, can you tell me where I am, mate? And he said, yeah, he said, you're in the middle of the Pilliga. Do you know where that is? I said, no, never heard of it. He said, what's your problem? I said, I'm nearly out of fuel. What, can you tell me where I can get some fuel? He said, you're about the equal distance from here to Coonabarabran and Narrabri, it wouldn't matter. Anyway, I said, I'm nearly out of fuel, I'd never get back. I asked him whether he was going to Narrabri, and asked him whether he could ring the NRMA or when he got there or something to bring me out some fuel as I was a member.
Yeah.
And he said, oh, you won't get anyone to come out here after dark. And anyway, he didn't explain why, but
right.
Anyway,
so you were stuck there?
Staying in this big old four-wheel drive all through the night, and about 3:30, 4:45, this thing just fair started a rocking, and all these funny weird lights and that were dancing around outside, and I looked out, and what looked through the window at me is why I'm in this state today. He pulled the door off the hinges, and this thing, like it defies the explanation of what it looked like. It was horrific, and it took me through the bush a fair way.
So it grabbed hold of you,
and we ended up at this. I suppose you'd call it a humpy sort of a thing, and this thing had a real fetish, obviously, for real thin, bow-legged, knock-kneed, white, hairy legs. He had pairs of legs hanging up, and when he realised that I was no good to him, he took me back. He took me back to the edge of the road, whatever it was. I assume it was a he. If it was a she, there's something wrong in the world. But
Bongo.
I never ever saw him again, and a timber truck picked me up the next morning when it went through, and he took me to Coonabarabran, and it wasn't long after that they made me stay at Happy Days Day Retreat, and I've been here ever since.
Bongo, that is just an amazing story.
And Miss Annie tells me apparently that there's some idiot out there in the middle of it somewhere last week or something. Tempting fate could. There's got to be something wrong with the person.
Can you give us if I can't not pushing you too hard, what did it look like?
I can't explain it. It was horrible.
Pretty scary story there, Bongo, and thank you for that.
Oh.
And you look after yourself, okay? I'm going to pass your concerns on to Trev, who is our roving reporter, Trevor Chappell and Anna Mulder, who we've got out there in the Pilliga scrub tonight. Bongo, thanks for your call, all right? You look after.
Oh.
Okay, and that was Bongo's story. Unfortunately, I'm going to assume that Bongo is no longer with us. He does sound like he was an old man at the time of that recording, which is probably 10 plus years ago that I first heard it. So rest in peace, Bongo, wherever you may be. That was a fantastic story, and I still go back and re-listen to that audio several times throughout the year. I think also maybe something to do with the fact that he sounds exactly like I remember my grandfather on my mother's side to sound. He passed away when I was very young, so I don't really remember him that well, but from what I can hear, he sounded a lot like Bongo, so maybe that's why I have such a fondness for this story. Hamish Mabin Ross, who several of you will have heard on this podcast, if you've been listening along, reckons it's it's an actor, but I'm going to quote that wrestling guy, and it's still real to me, damn it. I choose to believe that Bongo is a real person. Well, actually, no, that's not entirely fair. Hamish did clarify what he meant. He says he thought that Bongo might have been attacked by a person and sort of, in his own mind, sort of twisted it to be this kind of supernatural thing in order to cope with the horror of what happened to him. So yeah, I don't know. What do you think? Do you think it was a real story, or do you think it's a sketch made up for radio? Our fourth story for the evening is submitted by none other than Tracey Royce of the Quantum Foundation. Now, if you've been listening to my spooky episodes, you'll definitely know who Tracey is. Tracey's a paranormal investigator that's been a part of the Quantum Foundation for many, many years, and so she's had all sorts of potentially paranormal experiences. When I was asking if Tracey wanted to submit to the Phantom Files, it was kind of funny. I actually didn't realise she had had some paranormal experiences. If you listen to my interview with her, the way they talked about how methodical and logic-based their paranormal investigation was, I didn't actually realise that Tracey's had some that she can't explain using logic and science. And man, does she have a good story. This one here was one that I actually recorded on Zoom with her. I was sort of asking her questions to kind of steer the story in a way that just answered questions that the listener might have and that kind of thing, and then I've edited out all my stuff, so it sounds like Tracey just telling a long, continuous story. And there's a part in it where, without spoiling it, the entity kind of appears or makes itself known, and I got chills going down my spine when she started telling me this story. So with that, I'm not going to give you any more context. Tracey does a good job of setting everything up, so let's just roll the tape.
Okay, probably the strangest experience I've ever had was back in 2009, and I actually think it was the first group paranormal investigation I ever went on. And we went up to Auckland, and we did a pub in Auckland, and the pub was the ground floor, the first floor, and the second floor. And I got a few odd feelings when we were there, and one was that there had been another floor. So I was asking the team that I was with, had there been the third floor to the building, and no one could tell me, and I asked the staff and they couldn't tell me either. And so we investigated mainly the first floor and the second floor, because the first floor was where the supposed heebie-jeebies were felt by everybody, including patrons. And so we had a staff member that was with us the whole time, because, you know, of course, we could be running out with a bottle of vodka for all they knew if they left us unattended. So we had a staff member with us the whole time, and we set up what we called our base on the first floor. So when we set up the base, it was a DVR system with cameras. I think this particular one was an 8-channel DVR system, and we'd have a monitor screen where someone would always be sitting there watching the monitors. And the go was that we would swap around between investigating and watching the monitors, and so we would do sort of like hour shifts. Well, one of my favourite things I discovered that night was to watch the monitors. I actually enjoyed it more than investigating, to be quite honest with you. So every time the call came through on the walkie to swap over, I was like, no, I'm all right, bro. Just leave me. I'm all good doing what I'm doing. So they continued investigating, and at this particular point there was me and another team member, and the barman was behind us, and everybody else was on the second floor, investigating the second floor and holding call-out sessions. And we were downstairs on the first floor in the bar area, and looking at the monitor. And the other team member that was with me was yakking to the barman, because the barman was standing right by us, and we were all three of us stood in front of the monitor. And so she turned away and she was yakking to him. Now, earlier on in the evening, when we had gone up during daylight to look at the second floor, and the second floor was just being used as a storage area, literally. And we'd gone up and we'd had a look, and I'd gotten this really strange feeling from the wall. And one of the team members noticed that I was standing there quizzically looking at the wall, and she said to me, "What's the matter with you? What are you looking at?" And I said, "I don't know, there's something weird about this wall. Has there been a doorway here before? Does anyone know? Like a doorway through to another building? Because it's just, I don't know, I'm just getting a funny hum off this wall." Anyway, didn't think any more about it. So we're watching the monitors later on in the evening, and everyone's upstairs. And the other person that was with me, the other team member that was with me, had turned her back on the monitors and was yakking to the barman about something. And I'm still facing the monitors, watching the monitors. And over on the right-hand side, in the far back corner, I see this little black thing. And it's just like a black blob on the screen. But it wasn't there before. So I turn around and I bang the other team member without taking my eyes off the monitor, and I said, "Hey, can you have a look at this? Come and have a look at this." And she turns back around and she goes, "What?" I said, look there. What's that?" And she goes, "Oh, no." And she turns back and she starts talking to the barman again. So anyway, I'm thinking, well, it wasn't there. And I muttered, "Well, it wasn't there a minute ago." And of course she's in full conversation about something and didn't even hear me. So I'm still watching it. And then I'm staring and I'm leaning right forward peering at it, and I'm like, that bloody thing's growing. So I thought, no, don't be silly, it's just your eyes. And then I look again and I'm staring at it and I'm like, no, that's growing. So I turn around to her again and I said, "Lisa, look at this. Look at this. That's got bigger. Has that got bigger?" And she looks and she goes, "Yeah, it has actually." "What the hell is that?" And I said, "It has got bigger, eh?" And she goes, "Yes, that's definitely bigger than what it was when you first pointed it out to me." "How very strange," she goes. Anyway, she turns back and starts talking to the barman. So I'm watching this thing, And I'm absolutely gobsmacked, because it wouldn't have even been 2 minutes later, this thing grows into the size of a torso. Then this head just comes out from the top of it. These arms come out from the sides. And then all of a sudden, it stands up and it's got legs. And I'm just absolutely frozen. And then it's hard to describe. And then it walks out from the corner of the room and it just disappears. And I'm like, there was a lot of swearing. And Lisa's like, what's going on? And I said, mate, you got to just watch the screen. Just watch the screen a minute. And then I realised something, and it never came back. And then I realised something. I could only see it when they were taking photos with the flash of their camera. So I jumped on the walkie-talkie and I said, guys, can you take some photos? Because I'm seeing something. Every time your flash goes, I swear I'm seeing something. So a couple of people, and there was probably about maybe 5 or 6 of them up there, and the majority of them had cameras with big flashes. So a couple of people took a couple of photos and then stopped. And yes, I saw it. And I jumped back on the walkie and I said, guys, you need to just constantly take photos. I want all of you. Every single one of you just go snip, 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 snip. Do it. Just don't stop until I tell you, because I'm definitely seeing something. So they started doing that. Meanwhile, I hit Lisa from behind and said, look at this. Look at this. Tell me what this is. And so she's looking at the screen, and then there's just a string of expletives out of her mouth. And this thing changes. It turns into this dark thing that stepped out from the corner, and it was almost like it was still black, but it was overlaid with thousands and thousands of tiny little pinpricks of light. And you could see the individual dots of light. So it now had kind of become greyish with the white overlaid across the top of it. And as they're flashing, it's like a strobe effect. Myself, this other investigator, the barman, all 3 of us watch this thing walk across the floor. You can see the arm movements and everything. But it was like a strobe light. You know, when you see someone walking in a strobe light and it's cut off, and then you see it and then it's cut off. It was like that. And of course, it depended on how much we saw of them, depended on the flash. It was only when these flashes lit up the room that we were seeing this thing. When we were just looking through the IR cameras on their own, the CCTV cameras, it was not there. It walked across the floor, and the craziest thing is, this had a head, it had a torso, it had shoulders, it had legs, it had arms. I could see the arms swinging, the momentum. As you know, as you walk, how your arms swing, I was seeing all of it. It was enormous. It would have been about 6.5 foot, 7 foot tall. It was really tall. It proceeded to walk across the floor. It turned and it walked down the floor, and it walked right to another investigator, and I'm on the walkie-talkie going, it's walking towards, and I won't say the person's name because he's now deceased, it's walking towards Joseph, let's say, and it walked towards him. It walked into him and disappeared, and Joseph then collapsed on the floor. It then jumped out of Joseph and it ran right across the whole length of the floor and disappeared through the wall that I was standing in front of earlier that day going, there's something weird about this wall. It was almost like this thing got, when he went down, it was almost like this thing got a hell of a fright and jumped straight back out of him. That was what, from the body language of the thing, that was what it looked like. It was like the thing went, oh shit, and just jumped straight out of him. Now, Joseph had a very serious heart condition, and he had to give up investigating because of it. So everyone was assuming that's what it was at the time, and I was getting some weird looks when I was saying no, because that thing jumped in him. I saw that thing jump in him. Interestingly enough too with Joseph, later on in the night, I had, you know how I said that I'd asked about this third story to the building? I'd also asked if there'd been a fire there. Don't ask me why. And to my mind, there'd been a fire there, and that's why there's no longer a third floor there. But there was definitely, I'm sure there was a third floor there. It just looks like there was a third floor there. He got a photo taken of his arm late, I think it was before that incident, and his arm was all burnt and scorched, and you could see all the flesh inside of the arm. And that was taken on someone's camera. And we all saw that. And that's exactly what it looked like. It looked like someone had the flesh burnt off their arm. It was definitely light-based. It was which begs the question to me, and which is something that I have grappled with for a number of years, and I don't know enough about light and how it works and light refraction and all the rest of it, although I am learning. It leads me to believe how we conduct investigations today, we are missing something majorly. We are majorly missing something, because captures on video camera or by photo of bona fide, what could be determined as bona fide or construed as bona fide supernatural, and not just an insect wings being reflected in the light of an IR camera. Makes me think that we haven't got it right. We haven't got it right. Because those captures are very, very rare. I remember the barman turning around and I said, did you see that? Did you fucking see that? And he said, I wish I hadn't. I am never fucking going up to that room again. And that's my story. And every single word of it is not a lie. And I have 3 witnesses to that, and I have 2 witnesses to that, and all 3 of us saw exactly the same thing. Exactly.
And we are back. Wasn't that a fantastic story? That might be one of the best ghost, potentially paranormal stories I've ever heard. And imagine how I felt when she was telling me that story live. I got to hear that, in person. Well, not in person, but on Zoom. You know what I mean. I felt very lucky to hear that story. And now you get to hear it too. We had a long discussion afterwards about the way that the pinpricks of light appeared on this spirit, I suppose is the correct word. And she's actually got a photo that when she saw the photo, she was like, that's what that thing looked like. So I'm going to chuck a link to it in the show notes. So if you want to see what exactly she meant by pinpricks of light, go into the show notes now and click on that and you should be able to see. If you've enjoyed listening to Tracey's story here, she has actually given me another couple that I might play on a future episode of The Phantom Files. And Tracey is actually writing a book about all of her paranormal experiences. And if you're interested in pre-ordering this book, just send her an email at tracyroyce1965@gmail.com. There's an asterisk there. Tracey has an E in it. TRACEYROYCE 1965@gmail.com. Just send Tracey an email and say you're interested in pre-ordering her book. No payment is required until the book is published, at which point you'll get an email saying it's ready to go. Now, I was planning on talking a little bit about my visit to the Dean's Bush house, or Dean's House, I guess it's sometimes known here in Christchurch. This house is one of our, to be honest, it's one of our only allegedly haunted buildings here in Christchurch. There are 2 others. There is, I cannot remember one of them. One of them is a hotel, and then the other one is allegedly the Yoldhurst or the Racecourse Hotel, I think it's called. But yeah, those are our three sort of, it's kind of commonly accepted that they're haunted buildings, and I actually went in and I did the tour, and I emailed them in advance a few days ahead of time asking if they had any guides that would be willing to talk to me on the podcast about their experiences. And as it turns out, they do have a couple of guides, possibly even more. I think several of the staff did claim to be sort of spiritual or sensitive, I think was the word they used. And I was going to talk about my what I learned from the tour here, but I'm just checking the length of the episode, and I try to keep these ones to about 45 minutes. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to talk about that now. I might do another episode in the future of this with that story where I'll just tell it on the podcast, because there were quite a few cool supernatural kind of experiences that this guide had. If you're thinking of visiting Christchurch and you would like to go and do the tour of the Dean's house, the Dean's Bush, I can highly recommend it. It only costs about $10, and the guides, I met a few of the guides, they were all really, really nice, really lovely. And if you ask them really nicely and in advance, they'll tell you about all the ghosty stuff. So there's one particular guide that did my tour and gave me some cool stories and anecdotes, everything like that, and they actually gave me permission to tell these stories on the podcast and in my live show. However, I'm just not to use any identifying language about them, so I'm going to use neutral pronouns where I can for them. And I have to ask the listeners, please don't seek out this guide. They say they're spiritual, but they're not exactly wanting to broadcast that about themselves, which is fair because their family doesn't really believe in it. So I just ask you to respect their wishes, and don't go looking for which guide it was. So to finish off tonight, I'd like to play this story which a comedian friend of mine from up in Auckland, Brady Thompson, was kind enough to record, that I sort of was given from this guide, and it was about a trip they took up to Cape Reigna, which is a very spiritually significant place in New Zealand, that becomes clear as to why in this story, so I don't really need to give you any context there. So with that, let's start the final story of the evening.
Years ago, I went on a family holiday up to Cape Reigna. On the way up, we passed by a car accident. There were police and ambulances around the car wreck, and as we drove past, I felt an immense spiritual presence. I said to my family in the car that I think somebody died in that crash. Sure enough, watching the news later on that night, one person was killed in the accident. When we arrived at Cape Reigna, we had to walk up a hill to the lighthouse in the very edge of the land. As we approached, I could feel more and more individual spirits flying around, hundreds of them swirling all around me. It became really overwhelming, as I can sense the different spirits, like the difference between each of them. They all have their own frequency. They kept swirling around me, and I felt quite claustrophobic until I couldn't take it anymore, and I said out loud, not loud enough for my family to hear, but still out loud, I said, I can feel you. And almost instantly they receded. I could breathe again, and they heard me, and they were giving me space. For the rest of the trip, they gave me my space, and everything was fine. I did a bit of research, and in Māori culture, Cape Reigna is where the spirits of the dead travel up to the Cape on their journey to the afterlife. Reinga is literally the word for underworld or afterlife in Te Reo. The spirits go there to leap off the headland and climb the roots of the 800-year-old Pohutakawa tree and descend to the underworld to return to their traditional homeland of Hawaii, using the Te Ara Wairua, the spirit's pathway. I wondered why there was so much spiritual activity there, and it kind of dawned on me. If you were Māori and passed away, having heard for your whole life all the stories about Cape Reigna being the place to go to the afterlife, even if you didn't believe in the afterlife, wouldn't you go there yourself, just to verify it? Makes sense when you think about it that way.
And we are back. Wasn't that a cool little anecdote from the guide there? And a big thank you to Bridie for recording that in such a professional manner. So that brings us to the end of Volume 4 of The Phantom Files. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's been worth the wait. There's some fantastic stories in this episode. Now, as to the future of The Phantom Files, if the fact that it took me a year to gather enough stories in order to make a 4th volume is an indicator, as you can tell, it's very hard for me to find New Zealand stories that are given to me by the people that it happened to. So at this point, I'm going to say it looks unlikely that I'm going to do another volume of The Phantom Files. I just can't seem to get people to actually follow through. I've had plenty of people that have offered stories and then just not send them through. So, you know, as much as I love doing these episodes, I've got so many other things I need to be doing rather than chasing people up about sending me voice notes. There is a small glimmer of hope if you really like these paranormal episodes. I was a guest on a podcast called Paranormal NL, which I think stands for Newfoundland, which is up in Canada. And Jen, the host of Paranormal NL, has been putting me in touch with paranormal investigators and other kind of paranormal people from, I think, all over the world. I've got a big list of guests that I need to get in touch with, and I was thinking initially maybe I would interview them on the podcast, but I mean, frankly, my podcast is not a paranormal podcast. It's mainly the arts, so I don't want to oversaturate it with paranormal investigator interviews. However, I thought instead of interviewing these guests, maybe I could just do what I did with Tracey and get them on a Zoom call and ask them about an experience they've had and kind of direct them with questions and then edit it all together so that it seems like them telling one long, unbroken story. So I don't really know whether the listeners of the Phantom Files are interested in hearing paranormal stories from overseas. I always kind of thought the selling point of these episodes were that they were from New Zealanders, which you don't normally see New Zealand paranormal stories. So I'm going to make a post on my Facebook page and my Instagram, and then probably in the paranormal groups on Facebook. And I might just do a quick poll to see how interested people are in hearing stories from overseas. And if there's enough people that say they'll listen to some stories from overseas, then yeah, I think that's what I'll do is I'll get in touch with these investigators and I'll hear an experience of these, and I might be able to stitch together a volume 5. So yeah, if I get a couple of stories and then talk about my experiences at the Dean's house, I think I might have enough to do volume 5 of the Phantom Files. Well, thank you once again for listening. I really appreciate you tuning in, and thanks so much for the patience between volume 3 and volume 4 of the Phantom Files. If you've enjoyed this episode, which I produced for free, and you want to help me out, you can give me a review on Spotify, Good Pods, or the Apple Podcast player service, whatever it's called. Apple Podcasts, you know what I'm talking about. I don't have a cool or interesting sign-off like some of the other spooky podcasts do, so I'll just say this: stay safe, and I look forward to talking to you, hopefully not in another year's time, for the Phantom Files, Volume 5.
This has been a Tape Deck Media production. Thank you for listening.
Hey Ruddlers, I joined a group of podcasters that we are calling the Trailer Alliance, a group of podcasters that share each other's trailers at the end of the episodes and generally support each other. So at the end of each episode for the next few weeks, I'm going to be playing a trailer of one of the members of the Trailer Alliance. And here's one of them now. I hope you like it.
Top of the day, everyone. I'm Nisha.
And I'm Buddha Badass.
And we're the hosts of Hot Garbage True Crime Edition. Do you guys like true crime?
I really don't. I feel like you force me on this show every freaking time I come here.
Do you guys enjoy listening to victims and murderers and grotesque stuff?
People that are sick in the freaking head, that's who likes it. That's who likes it.
Well, if you like that kind of stuff, then you should totally check us out. I mean, every single Thursday, we drop the most hottest cases, and we have fun while doing it.
You drop the most hottest cases? You drop murder and death. Kill.
How many people can actually say that they have fun while listening to a true crime podcast? And I feel like that's what we do here.
So you're just not going to listen to me now? I'm just going to say this and you're not going to listen to me?
And you know what? Our listeners are not just our listeners, but they're our friends and our trash pandas. We love you guys.
They're a lot, and I will agree to that part, but I'm still just mad at you for just not talking to me. They're paying you this well to say all this.
So check out Hot Garbage on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere that you listen to podcasts. Check us out every single Thursday. A new episode drops.
I officially hate this commercial. On some real.
Hey Ramblers, I'm going to be recording my second ever full-length comedy special, Taylor Ruddle, Panic at the Buffet, on the 26th of October. It's a Saturday from 8:30, and I would absolutely love it if you could be there. In Panic at the Buffet, I explore 5 different experiences from my life where I started overthinking, panicked, and then did something that I regretted at the time, but make for entertaining stories in hindsight. Some of the experiences in question include buying clothes as a plus-size man, trying to spell my name over the phone, a little white lie to a cashier that got out of hand, trying not to frighten women on the street at nighttime, and of course, the buffet. It all culminates at the end when I have the chance to step up and be a hero, having finally got a handle on my awkwardness. Or have I? Come along and find out what happened. The reviewer Bad Apple described this show as a fantastic investigation into the effects of anti-intellectualism in New Zealand, of self-realization, and the true dangers of small-town Foursquare check-ins. I was nominated for the Best Comic at the 2023 Nelson Fringe Festival, and I won the New Zealand Comedy Guild Breakout Comedian of the South Island 2023. So it's gonna be a really funny show. There's some early bird tickets available for $15, but general admission is $20. You can get those from littleandromeda.co.nz. This one is going to be my last full-hour show for a couple of years, as I want to spend the time following this building up the podcast and other kind of online content. So if you've been meaning to come out and see me at a comedy show, you just haven't got around to it yet, this is pretty much your last chance to see me doing an hour for a couple of years. So I highly recommend you come out and have a giggle with me. Ticketing link is also in the show notes. Thank you, and back to the show.